there, art nerds. Today we're taking a look at they're upside down, the Phoenix watercolors. This is a 48 half pan palette that looks suspiciously like some of the other watercolor palettes we've seen on the channel. Namely, it looks a lot like Winsor and Newton to me. I am looking forward to unboxing and swatching this watercolor palette and seeing if it holds up to the quality of its namesake. So grab your paints, grab your brushes, and let's get swatching. I'm excited about this one. So today we're taking a look at Phoenix watercolors. These are yet another watercolor brand that's been in and out of my Amazon cart for a while now, and I finally bit the bullet. I know the Frugal Crafter has already reviewed these, and I am avoiding all other reviews until I have my own unbox and swatch review finished so that it doesn't bias my opinion, which frankly makes researching these things really difficult because Phoenix doesn't seem to have an easily accessible website. It sure doesn't come up when I Google Phoenix watercolors, but everybody and their brother's review comes up, including the reviews on white canvas, which are hilarious because somebody asked if these are any good, and instead of answering the question, people just tell them to try other brands instead. So way to read the question there, friends. But you know what? I'm excited about unboxing this and swatching this today. I've had kind of mixed feelings about it because it looks a lot like Winsor and Newton watercolors from afar. I wish I had like a fresh Winsor and Newton set to kind of show you guys, and my eyes kept tricking me every time I saw it. But that doesn't make them bad. It just makes them interesting to me. And now there is a scan with the transparency app. I might do that. I'm not super sure what that is. That could definitely be a way to scam or phish somebody, so I'm going to do it on my old phone. So we're going to take a look at the package first, and then I'll read to you guys what Amazon has to say about these. Phoenix watercolors, highly pigmented with good transparency and diffusivity, which I like that word. That's a new one to me, but I might adopt it. Smart choice for amateurs and artists, inspiring you anywhere, anytime. And they are made by the Shuyang Phoenix Art Materials Co. Limited. So these are Chinese watercolors, and we're taking a look at the 48 half pan set today. This is the studio set, and generally when watercolors say they're studio quality, it means they're cheaper quality, but we'll find out. But it does claim that they are artist quality, so fingers crossed here, friends. So I paid $38.99 for these on Amazon, which puts them in kind of the same price bracket as the Rosa Galleria and the Mungyo watercolors. So I'm going to be thinking about those a lot as I swatch these. I've actually had some pretty good results with Chinese watercolors. Superior and Supervision both make some really fun, interesting watercolors, and fans of the channel know I really like Paul Rubens' tubins. So again, I got high hopes, and as long as they're not trying to hide anything or pretend that there's somebody they're not, we should get along just fine. So who is Phoenix Watercolors? Founded in 1988, Phoenix Arts Group has been specialized in the development and production of art canvas as well as other fine art materials for more than 30 years. Known for its outstanding performance in product quality, the company has grown into a major supplier of artist canvas in the world and a leading supplier in the art materials industry. In answer to the rapidly growing demand for its painting materials, Phoenix has built 5 factories and established its distribution centers in different countries. Now our products are available to purchase in more than 50 countries all over the world. Phoenix is also a member of several respectful associations in the art industry of the U.S., including the Art and Creative Materials Institute, the International Art Materials Association, and the National Art Education Association, which I'm going to be Googling all of those because y'all know I'm an art nerd and I want to know all about it. Why choose Phoenix? Our product covers a full range of canvases, paint colors, easels, brushes, frames, and other painting accessories. Now, to be fair, I haven't seen hardly any of those on Amazon. So they say this, I can't find their website just yet. We're gonna believe that this is true, but I can't comment on it one way or the other. Painting Canvas series contains pure linen canvas, mixed linen canvas, pure cotton canvas, and cotton polyester mixed canvas. The product type ranges from student grade to fine artist grade and works great for painters with different skill levels. All products are manufactured with advanced production technology, rigorous processes, and use selected raw materials. We keep the commitment of providing fine art materials that is both safe for kids and adults. We're going to talk about that in a second. Nowadays, Phoenix has served more than 100,000 professional artists and 20 million art amateurs. Where are they getting that number from? We're striving to do better in art supply industry. Phoenix watercolors are a range of watercolors that are made to professional quality standards by using high purity pigments and excellent grinding technology. The range consists of 48 colors, which possesses good light fastness, superior granulating quality, and remarkable transparency. These are available in tubes and half pans, and as part of my student grade Showdown, I am going to be reviewing the half pans. Now, we might decide through this review that, like the Rosa Galleria, these are really more professional grade than student grade, and that might adjust how we feel about these, but we'll let the swatches and the field test help us decide that. And these were made in China. This set comes with one metal tin palette, 48 half pans, so no brushes, nothing else. I'm okay with that. All right, so I did find their website. It is phoenixpaint.en-in-china.com. That'll be down in the show notes for you guys. And they're another company that looks like they make a lot of everything. And their stuff looks kind of like a mix between Holbein branding and Winsor and Newton branding with a little bit of Liquitex in there. And that's not necessarily, a bad thing, but it's not necessarily a good thing either. It's just really hard to tell. Now, they make a variety of paints. They seem to have a studio line, and I'm mostly seeing studio. Sorry, I'm not showing you guys as I'm looking. And a lot of their products just kind of look very similar. So they might be a white label company, or they might be providing white label products for others to purchase. They do, as I browse around, they do offer OEM and ODM services. So that basically means that they can produce these and you can put your name on them, or you can work with them to produce something for your company. So that might explain why so many of these are looking familiar on their website. And they also allow for sample orders and factory tours. So all right, that's very similar to the See Me art. Let's go ahead and unbox these. So one of the first things I noticed as I unboxed this palette is how beautiful it actually is. Look at that metallic blue. I have never seen a watercolor palette this sort of metallic automotive blue before. I love it. They also have their brand name embossed in the metal itself, very classy. And the back ring, not the most impressive. I don't really use these for plein air painting anyway, though. I'm a watercolor comic artist and an illustrator. That's kind of where I'm coming from, my viewpoint when it comes to watercolors. And that viewpoint is gonna kind of frame how I talk about watercolors, what I'm looking for in watercolors, and who I think watercolors are accessible to and for. So if you are into watercolor illustration and comics, if you're into using illustration to tell stories, I probably have a viewpoint very similar to your own. And hi, welcome. Hopefully you'll find what you're looking for here today. So this is the exterior packaging. I'm already kind of impressed. For some reason, when we're looking at a 48 half pan palette in this style, it just always seems like so many more colors. Maybe it's because we're gonna have to unwrap all these. So we also have this small brochure that has the, oh, thank you, Phoenix! So it has the color names, it has the pigment information, yes! It does not seem to have the lightfast or opacity info, but I'm hoping that might be on these half pans. And it seems like it is printed in multiple languages, so I'll just go ahead and read the English to you guys. Phoenix Watercolors, highly pigmented with good transparency and diffusivity. Smart choice for amateurs and artists. A balanced spectrum of 48 colors made from carefully selected pigments. These colors are available These colors are available in pans, 8 milliliter tubes and 21 milliliter tubes, and also in a range of sets. And I appreciate that they actually have that in English, because while Google Translate has been our friend on many occasions, it just makes it so much faster. Let's take a look at one of our half pans. Come on. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, so we have the color number. This would be lemon yellow hue. That might explain why they can say these are non-toxic, is all of the more toxic colors are probably hues. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that. It has a permanence of A. It has a pigment index of PY175. So pigment info and permanence info are on the half pans, but it does not seem to include the transparency or the lightfast info on here. So our individual half pans have a paper belly band, and then they are wrapped in plastic. You guys know how I feel about that. That is a lot of plastic waste that's never really gonna biodegrade. So I'd like to see more companies make the shift to glassine, paper, just something that's more likely to break down over time. This is very similar, in my opinion, to the way Winsor and Newton packages their half pans, although it's been a long time since I've purchased Winsor and Newton half pans. I usually refill my half pans from tubes, a little bit less waste, a little bit more economical. So let's go ahead and get these unwrapped so we can start swatching. So I know this probably isn't a deal killer to most people who are buying art supplies, but it takes a while to unwrap 48 pans when they're double wrapped like that. So I appreciate the consideration to preserving these half pans, but it didn't necessarily work as well. Now, I did notice that some of these, there we go. So they are very obviously extruded and then cut. You guys can, come on, you guys can actually see where they've been cut. You can also see the extrusion lines and then placed into the half pans, not even necessarily glued. Some companies will put a glue dot. I don't really like that. Some will also use a little bit of gum arabic. I like that a little bit better. Phoenix chooses to do neither. So your half pans might fall out. Now, if they do fall out, you can glue them in with gum arabic. It's not really too big a deal, but it is something that I wanted to point out. You can also probably squeak 2 more half pans per row for 8 more half pans in the set, or 4 more whole pans if that's the route you want to go. So now it's time for us to start swatching. This did not come with its own paper. I'm fine with that. So today we're going to be using our standard, the one we've used for all of our student grade Showdown, the Blick Studio watercolor paper. This is their cotton rag block bound watercolor paper, and this is just a slightly larger block than I normally use, but it is the same type of paper. And to test for opacity, we're going to be using an alcohol marker. I finally found my Copic, so I'm going to be using a black Copic marker, and since this is alcohol based, it should not reactivate with the water. Sometimes though, we do have a little bit of chemistry going on where they do tend to reactivate or to engage with one another and we get some weird colors, but it is a good way to test for opacity that we wouldn't be able to see if we just left it to the white of the paper. We're also going to be looking at how quickly the paints activate, and I will give them a spritz of water to give them the best chance possible. We're also going to look at granulation, and they did say there should be some granulation, so I'm hoping for it because frankly, I've reviewed a lot of student grade watercolors and a lot of them don't have much granulation at all, and granulation is one of the things I really love. So hopefully we'll see some granulation in this 48-piece set. We are also going to take a look at how they lift, but that's going to be a little bit later on down the line. We're also going to do some color mixing as well as some wet into wet testing in today's unbox and swatch review. And that's going to give us a good idea of how these paints would handle in a more general sense. Then later on in a follow-up video, I'm going to do a field test where I paint a full watercolor illustration with these watercolors, and that is my more specific test, and that's going to appeal more to illustrators or people who enjoy watercolor comics. So I'm going to go ahead and get set up and start swatching our Phoenix watercolors. Pigment info for this set will be linked in the show notes, but the colors in this set are lemon yellow hue, cadmium yellow pale hue, jaune brilliant, gamboge hue, cadmium yellow hue, cadmium orange hue, vermilion hue, cadmium red pale hue, cadmium red hue, scarlet lake, cadmium red deep hue, alizarin crimson hue, permanent rose, rose madder hue, purple lake, mauve, dioxine violet, ultramarine, cobalt blue hue, verde blue, cerulean blue hue, turquoise, phthalo blue, Prussian blue, phthalo green, viridian hue, emerald, leaf green, hooker's green dark, hooker's green light, permanent green dark, permanent green light, olive green, sap green, raw sienna yellow ochre, raw umber, burnt sienna, light red, Indian red, burnt umber, Van Dyke brown, sepia indigo, Payne's gray, ivory black, lamp black, and Chinese white. And when I spritzed these with clean water, the areas that absorbed the water got a little bit lighter, and that's a little red flag. There's optical brighteners in here. I noticed while swatching that these kind of glob up onto the brush, and that's a pretty common problem with student grade watercolors. And professional grade half pans might do that to some extent, but it's more noticeable with student grade watercolors because of those optical brighteners. You can really see the paint on the brush. And the colors are bright when wet, but they do dry more desaturated, and these muddy the water fast. There's a lot of reds in this set, like 4 of them that are pretty similar, and I could not tell the difference between the swatches if I presented them without context. They all look the same, even side by side. And these are probably comparable to Cotman, maybe a little bit better, but they're definitely cheaper. The neutrals are pretty weak, and I gotta ask, why are the neutrals always so weak with these cheaper student grade watercolors? And there's actually some granulation with these, which I appreciate. And I did notice after the initial wetting that these things are sticky, and they stay kind of sticky. So while swatching these, I started to feel pretty excited because I felt like these handled a lot better than I'd kind of expected. And I was starting to look forward to the additional tests and to the field test. But stay tuned, not all that glitters is gold with these paints. This is still drying quite a bit, so I'm going to put it to the side when I do my color mixing. I'm still going to be working on the Blick Studio cotton rag paper, just a different block of it, which thank you so much to my patrons, because your support on Patreon allows me to replenish consumables like watercolor paper, as well as buy products to review, so thank you guys so much. I do have some notes. I did talk about some of them in the time-lapse section, but I just kind of want to go over a few of them just to kind of reiterate them. There are a few colors, not a lot of colors, but a few colors that I think are too similar in this set. These here, it was almost like I was swatching the same color 4 times. This is a 48-piece set, so there's a little more leeway for that, but I think that's kind of excessive. They could have done what some sets do and do some cobalt violets, some cobalt turquoises, you know, to add to the range rather than like 4 of the same warm reds. They could have done some more purples, they could have done some more pinks, they could have done some more cooler reds, just anything, because it's very samey. I mean, these are a little bit different, but it's a pretty close gamut. Within the blues, there are a couple, these 2 here, which are a little samey for me, otherwise really pretty good. And within the greens, pretty good spread. Nothing is too similar. Maybe these 2 greens are a little close, but not too bad. Now, another concern I have is that the neutrals, the browns here, the yellow ochres, are a little bit weaker than I was kind of hoping they would be. It took some scrubbing, it took some like really going in to try and get those colors up, but honestly that's really not unusual with student grade watercolors. Why is that? These would be the cheaper colors. All the earth pigments would be the cheaper colors. Why are they always so weak? Maybe it is the extenders that they're using or the base. Speaking of, these watercolors were really kind of sticky. I don't know if they're using gum arabic honey or what, but they're kind of sticky, and they definitely did glob up on the brush a whole lot. But something that I'm heartened to see is we're actually seeing some granulation. Usually when I review student grade watercolors, granulation, yeah, right. But we're actually seeing some granulation, so it makes these look like they're more expensive watercolors than they actually are. And while the colors were quite a bit brighter when they were still very wet, and that's very common just with any type of watercolor, even the really nice ones tend to be like beautiful jewels while they're wet, and then they dry, not as jewel-like, and that's just them kind of reflecting all the light and being in solution, etc., etc., etc. They look a lot better. They're more saturated than, you know, I would expect. And then some of the ADHD there, y'all. They are more saturated than my previous Unbox and Swatch tests would have indicated that I could expect from these, so that's pretty good. So far, I think they might be a little bit better than the Mungyo. I would say they're comparable to Winsor and Newton's Cotman, maybe even a little bit better and definitely cheaper. And the neutrals with the Cotman set aren't that great either. So I don't actually have any Cotman watercolors to compare these to. I've donated them, but I do have some videos where I talk a lot about Cotman, and I'll link those down in the description below, and hopefully you guys will check them out. So I'm gonna set this aside so it can finish drying, and we'll move on to our color mixing test. And the color mixing test really is gonna give us a lot of information about how these paints are actually going to handle as paints. So we're gonna be doing 2 types of tests. We're going to do an optical mixing test where we basically create a grid and glaze one layer of color over the other. And we're going to be doing some atomic mixing where we smash our 2 colors together to make a 3rd color. And that is going to tell us so much about the working properties of these watercolors, because while there are artists who do work with colors straight out of the palette just like this, a lot of calligraphers actually work like this, there's also a lot of artists who are very reliant on color mixing. And as a watercolor comic artist, I am very reliant on color mixing, color glazing, and being able to build up colors. I don't just work straight from the half pan. It would be pretty handy, but I really like mixing my own colors and kind of working with custom mixes. So that's something I'm definitely going to be looking at. And then after we do the color mixing test, we're gonna do the wet into wet test, and that's gonna kind of give us the last piece of the puzzle that we need, other than the lift test, which is important, but not the end all be all indicative. Since there's a mixing palette on this set, I'll go ahead and use it. So for optical brightener, you can glaze them. I'm going to go ahead and lay out my optical blending swatches. Here is pretty easy to find the primaries. Having a color map that's actually accurate would be more useful. For atomic mixing, the mixes themselves are pretty while they're wet, but they dry pretty desaturated, like really desaturated. There's some nice granulation though, so these do have potential. As they dry, I am noticing some scaling, like where you get those little patches of optical brighteners. It's not as bad as with the Arteza, but there's still something to keep an eye out for, and that's a big bummer and a big red flag for me. So you can glaze these, but there is some reactivation and there's also some resist, particularly with the yellows. It's like they form a harsh line resisting the new layer of color, which is pretty weird. You guys will see that in a few minutes, and it's really noticeable after it's had a chance to dry as well. So I know I talked about most of this during the time-lapse segment, but there's a couple of points I really want to kind of hammer home because they're red flags for me, and they're not necessarily signifiers that these are terrible and will not paint well, but they're definitely something to keep an eye out for. So I am noticing what looks like, it looks like granulation, yes, but it also looks like, you see there's like some additional white in there. It looks like these might have a scaling issue. We're going to see more of that or less of that if it, we're going to see if it is an issue when we do the wet into wet test, because that's when it tends to become really prominent. That was something that I really noticed with the Arteza watercolors. It's not as noticeable here, so it really could just be the granulation in the paper texture, but it's something I want to look out for. Another thing though that is less ambiguous is the paint itself causes a bit of a resist, especially on the edges where it's a little bit thicker when we try to glaze over it. And that's not really something I like to see. That's not generally a good sign. But both of these are just kind of minor red flags. There's a lot of reasons why that could have happened that isn't necessarily indicative of poor quality or further poor performance. So it's just something I want to keep an eye out on. So next I am going to do the lift test. That's a pretty simple test. We're going to grab our original color swatches. I'm going to use a flat watercolor brush. I'm going to scrub very gently. I'm going to use a clean paper towel to dab it up, and we will see how lifting or staining these watercolors are. Now, as I say in all of the unboxing swatch videos, I'm not looking for uniform anything. I'm not looking for total lift resistance, and I'm not looking for just total liftability, the white of the paper. I'm looking for variations because different pigments are gonna have different staining properties. So what I'm really looking for is a range of liftability, because that will tell me that the pigments themselves are playing a bigger role in how these paints actually handle. So unfortunately, these are all pretty lifting, like they're not even sticking to the paper, which is really concerning. This is a cotton rag paper, so some of the color should be able to get into the fibers, unlike with a cellulose paper where it would all just be sitting on top of the fibers. But even so, I'm getting a little bitty bit of staining, but not a whole lot, and there's not a lot of variation from color to color. So this could be an issue with the binder that they're using or some of the extenders that they're using. A lot of these companies are not very forthcoming with what binders they're using. So that's definitely an area to further investigate and maybe figure out. If you guys know why, please do let me know in the comments below. All right, friends, so now we're getting into the real. The proof is in the pudding section of this unbox and swatch. I'm gonna go ahead and remove our color test, our color mixing test from the block. There you go. You guys can see I go through a lot of paper when I'm doing these unbox and swatch reviews. So again, thank you patrons so much. But I'm using this. It's made by Paul Rubens. They sent it to me one time when I ordered through AliExpress, and I like to think of it as a kunai for artists. But there we go. We have our fresh, clean sheet of watercolor paper all ready for our wet into wet test. And I apologize for that. I thought I had it turned off. I did not. Let me move this. Go ahead and reactivate these since they've had a chance to dry out a little bit. I want them to be nice and fresh and ready for this test. So the wet into wet test is pretty simple. We are going to saturate this watercolor paper with water, and then we're going to dump a bunch of pigments on them. We're going to see how they move. We're going to see what they do. We're looking for good diffusion. We're looking for some seamless blending. Really, I'm looking for some granulation and some mistiness to the watercolors. We are hoping not to see any optical brightener halos or scaling or weird patchiness. That is not good at all, and we have seen that in some of these other showdowns. So cross your fingers that Phoenix can really pull one out and rise from the ashes. So with the wet into wet test, I'm going to go ahead and really saturate this cotton rag watercolor paper with lots of water to give our paints a chance to really diffuse. And while wet, these diffuse really nicely. You get some really lovely granulation as well. We'll see if these dry as nice as they look while wet, but you guys can see we've got some really beautiful saturation while these are still wet. Now, sadly, spoiler, as it dries, I'm starting to see the optical brighteners really affecting the paints. It wasn't noticeable while they were wet, but as they dried and settled down, it became really apparent, even with the Diox purple, which generally isn't that opaque and shouldn't be causing that issue. The purple is also drying a lot lighter than you would expect with the Diox purple. And I'm seeing the scaling with the brighter green, which is just such a bummer. I really wanted to like these. So now it's time for the kind of long part that everybody's ambivalent about. Let's compare it to some comparable watercolors. And as you guys can see, I have a table full here, and yet again, I have to thank my amazing patrons for their support, because this showdown would not be possible without them. So we're going to be taking a look at not all the watercolors we've talked about during the showdown, but the most comparable. We have the Rosa Galleria, the Arteza, the Mungyo, we've got the Etchr, the Mont Marte, and then a little bit later on, using the Magica time lapse, we're going to talk about Cotman, which I think these are very comparable to. We're also going to talk about some of my favorites, some that I would recommend that you check out that are actually less expensive and perform better, in my opinion. The Meiliang and the Superior, which if you've been watching this showdown, you have heard me. I mean, those are just like, so far, the undisputed champs. I'm still kind of figuring out where everything else goes in terms of ranking, but those two are still at the top for me. I haven't reviewed anything that unseats them yet. Maybe I won't get any that unseat them yet. So we're going to start with the Phoenix. I really do love this distinctive packaging. There's really not anything like this. The color is beautiful. The embossing is really cool. It's actually a little bit more compact than your standard 48 half pan palette. It's just a really cool palette. Whatever problems I have with the paints, the palette itself is really cool. I think they are pretty comparable to the, well, let's go head to head first off. All right, so here is another 48 pan palette. This is the Mungyo palette. Similar price point, right around $35. This is a Korean brand. And those of you who watch the channel, you guys know they like to white label these, but it sure sounds like Phoenix white labels as well. So this is a more standard 48 pan palette. So look at that. Somehow, oh, we're longer. that's how we're doing this. We're a little bit longer. I gotcha. All right, so I found the Mungyo watercolors to be, they're okay. I'm kind of looking forward to the field test, not because I think they're going to perform super well, but it's going to really help me crystallize how I feel about them. They are kind of gritty. They tend to cake up on the brush. They get pretty opaque, but they're fairly saturated. They have some interesting granulation. And while there is, if you guys look closely, a little bit of an optical brightener bloom, it's not as prevalent as with some of the other watercolors we've reviewed recently. So these aren't too bad. So these are both 48 half pan palettes at about the same price point. To me, the field test is really going to tell us which of these two palettes is the better palette. So hopefully you'll stick around for the field test and the final results of all this showdowning. I will say the Phoenix watercolors are better than the Arteza watercolors. You know, with Arteza being such a ubiquitous brand, they make so many products, they've got such a big presence here in the US, their watercolors are really not that good. So the palette itself is fine, but these are full. Let me show you the swatches to start out with. Okay, all right. These are full of optical brighteners. I mean, you can literally see the ring of white around the diffused dots. I mean, just really disappointing. We also can see all these harsh edges where it really should have blended out a little bit better wet into wet. They were very disappointing, which is a shame because I have a whole bunch of Arteza stuff to review for you guys, and I was really hoping these would be better. So let's pull out very gently, very carefully. Let's pull out the Phoenix Wet into Wet. It's not as smooth as I would have liked, but it's a lot smoother than the Arteza. So if you were buying one or the other, I would say get the Phoenix. They do have 12 pan sets if you're not looking for all that color or you're on a budget. They do have smaller sets, more comparable in size to the Arteza. It also comes in the cool distinctive blue palette. So I think you might be happier with the Phoenix than you might with the Arteza. And this is why no one will ever sponsor. Just telling it like it is, friends. So compared to the Rosa, so similar price point, but you don't get as many colors with the Rosa Galleria. And Rosa has way cooler palette designs than this one. This one's one of their more standard ones. You do get full pans, and they're poured pans. And this company and White Nights had some history there. So if you like the White Nights, you might like the Rosa. I really like these. I'm really looking forward to the field test for these because I think these are going to perform really well. I'm excited about it. Good diffusion. To me, no real noticeable optical brighteners. The colors, when mixed, they're still pretty vibrant. My only concern really is with the glazing. They didn't glaze so well, but I was doing this this unbox and swatch in a very humid environment. So I'll give it the benefit of the doubt that it didn't get a chance to dry fully. But I think the Rosa watercolors are better quality than the Phoenix watercolors. But of course, the field test is really when we're gonna find out just how good certain things are. Then I would say Etchr. Now, I think these are overpriced for what they are. Overpriced, overpackaged for sure. And I'm just gonna keep harping on this because they have such nice, beautiful packaging. And then their branding is just a sticker. They couldn't even pop for nicer branding on the actual palette itself. I do not understand the rationale, but the Etchr watercolors are actually not bad. They're overpriced, but they're not bad. The included swatch sheet is actual cotton rag, so it gives you a really good idea of what you're getting with these watercolors. They diffused decently well, not a lot of noticeable optical brighteners. Nothing really stands out as being a problem child. The color mixes are pretty good, nice and vibrant. I'm able to mix a variety of fun colors. We've got some good granulation. It's really just the price point with the Etchr. The price point and the fact that, I'm sorry, I'm gonna. Custom packaging, custom screening, custom packaging, custom packaging. I mean, even the cheaper brands can spring for something more impressive than that. Even a matte sticker. Yeah, you could even get screened on like Mungyo did. So yeah, I'm just always gonna rag on that. And then the Mont Marte set, which I think is pretty similar to the Phoenix watercolors. They're both a little sticky, so I don't really know what the binder is. They're not really being too forthcoming with that. Both companies disclose their pigment information, but the Mont Marte also discloses opacity information and lightfast information. So Mont Marte definitely gets it up there. Very inexpensive. I think the 12 pan for this would be very inexpensive as well. This is not available really in larger sizes. You can buy a metallic palette like this, but this isn't available in larger sizes. I like the tin itself, but the plastic liner in this is really cheap. Whereas this palette here, if you end up not liking these paints or you outgrow these paints, you can fill this with standard half pans, and it'll say Phoenix on the front and it'll be this really nice blue color, but you can put whatever you want in this. So what I really liked about the Mont Marte watercolors is beautiful diffusion, just really clean, reacts to the water really readily, like ready to move. I love that. Pretty saturated mixes. I would say maybe a little bit better saturation than the Phoenix, but didn't do as well in the glazing test, so meh. Also, not a whole lot of granulation. Everything is very candy primary color and very similar to the Phoenix watercolors. And my desk is so full, I probably won't really be able to show you guys. Let me switch things around real quick. The neutrals for the Mont Marte set are pretty underwhelming, very similar to the Phoenix watercolors. So this is another one where actually it would not surprise me. I kind of don't think this is the case, but it wouldn't surprise me if these are being made by Phoenix, because we know Phoenix does OEM and ODM manufacturing. Maybe they're selling their extruded chiclets. I don't know. If you guys know, let me know down in the comments below, because I'm always interested in knowing the provenance of my art supplies, and they're never interested in telling me. So maybe the Mont Marte are a smidge more opacity to them than the Phoenix, but this is another one where it's really going to take the field test for me to be able to tell which of these are good and which of these are terrible and regrettable purchases. One thing I will say for the Mont Marte is not everything is the same amount of lifting, whereas with the Phoenix, everything kind of lifts the same amount. And that could be the binder that they're using. Again, not super forthcoming with the materials used in these watercolors, but I would say everything on this table, with maybe the exception of the Rosa, is very much in the student grade category. I was hoping the Phoenix would not be. They did say that these are fine art materials, but that doesn't seem to mean anything at all. They said it's artist quality. I would say it's student quality. But yeah, that's... Oh yes, also, I'm going to include some time-lapse magic clips from some of my Cotman reviews, my Meiliang field test, and my Superior field test, just to give you guys a taste for, you know, what we found with that. I would say I might prefer these over Cotman, but I've got a big chip in my shoulder against Cotman because they are almost as expensive as Winsor and Newton's professional line, and I think they're just pretty mediocre for what they are. I would just say go ahead and spend the extra money if you can, or maybe try a different, less expensive professional grade brand. There are quite a few, like PwC and Rosa. So Cotman is kind of the student grade brand that like put a chip on my shoulder. But I also think that the Meiliang and the Superior are superior to everything on this table, with the exception of maybe the Rosa. But for the price, I would say the Mont Marte's not bad at all. So here are some clips from my older review where I compared Cotman, Winsor and Newton, and Reeves watercolors because they're all manufactured and distributed by Cole Art, so they're all in the same color family. And I did side by side swatches on cotton rag paper so that we could actually compare them. I started with the Winsor Newton, which is the professional premium grade watercolor from Winsor and Newton. I still use it to an extent, but honestly, I think it's kind of expensive for the amount of paint you get, although a lot of people do really like them. Then I moved on to the Cotman, which is their student grade watercolors, and frankly kind of expensive for student grade watercolors. I think a little sketching palette like this one here is around $30, especially if you're getting it somewhere like Michael's, but even on Amazon they tend to be pretty expensive. And Cotman is the reason I really don't like student grade watercolors, is because they're just not as good. You use up so much color trying to mix what you want to mix. They dry really desaturated, and they just don't handle like professional paints do. And they're sold as a paint that's supposed to serve as like the training wheels for you to actually learn how to paint. I actually felt like the Reeves watercolors dried in half pans handled about as well as the Cotman paints, although they smell a whole lot worse. So here's some clips from the Cotman field test. I did the field test side by side as well and released that to patrons. So I did 3 separate watercolor paintings, and this really allowed me to kind of coalesce my ideas about Cotman. I'd done a field test for Cotman in the past and found it really lacking, but being able to compare it against their premium and their really budget grade paints really allowed me to kind of see where they stand and to really form some opinions. And while they are passable paints, to me that price point is just not acceptable. So going from left to right, we have the Reeves, the Cotman in the middle, and the Winsor Newton on the right. And to me, as the person who painted these, I do think the appearance is quite striking, and there's quite obvious differences. The Reeves look very student, they look very amateur. The Cotman looks okay, and the Winsor and Newton looks much more professional. So we've done our unboxing, we've done our swatching, and we've even compared these to some of the other watercolors that I've talked about during our student grade showdown. So now it's time for our pros and cons and our final verdict. So pros and cons. Let's start with the pros. I like to start with something positive. These have quick activation. In fact, they're actually a little bit sticky. That's for someone who has used honey-based watercolors, that's not really a deal breaker for me, but I seriously doubt their binder is honey, so I'm kind of curious what binder they're using. Let me know if you know down in the comments below. They have good color saturation and intensity, especially straight from the half pan. Not quite so much when we're mixing the colors, but you know, straight from the half pan, there's good color payoff, so that's good. There's also a good color selection, minus those reds that are way too similar. Everything else has a distinct place in this palette. It feels like there's a good reason for it. Frankly, I would have liked to have seen some more cooler reds and some more pinks. So that could be something to consider in the future. Maybe I just got like a bum set. I don't know. I love the custom palette. Seriously, I really wanted to love this set because of this custom palette. This is so pretty and cool. I mean, the pink and the teal and the mint palettes that Paul Rubens does, those are great too. And the mint and the lemon and the pink and the blue palettes that Mia does, that's cool too. But this is really more my speed. And I think the price point for these is pretty fair. You're not paying too much. You get a nice palette and you get a good range of paints. But what about the cons? Well, for me, with this palette, it mainly boils down to those optical brighteners, particularly showing up when I'm trying to do wet into wet color mixing and just kind of let the paints speak for themselves. The voice of the optical brighteners starts to shine through, and I don't ever want that when I'm just kind of letting the paints do their thing. It's fine to give the color a little extra pop to make it a little bit more appealing in the half pan form, but I don't want it to show up when I'm actually painting. And I've had the inclusion of optical brighteners ruin paintings before. Mia, I'm looking at you. So I feel like the field test is really going to tell us what we need to know about these, but they're a little bit soupy. They're definitely a little bit sticky, and I'm kind of getting the vibe that these might be like the Mia watercolors, and that would just be so disappointing for me because I really wanted to like both of those sets, and the Mia broke my heart, as you guys can still tell. So what's my verdict for the Phoenix Watercolors Studio set? This is really one for the field test. That's really going to tell me everything I need to know, because for a watercolor comic artist like myself, these are a little bit too on the line for me to be able to give you guys any kind of an immediate judgment. They've got a lot going for them, but when the paint hits the water, they really start to fall apart. I do think, just from this review today, that these could be great for artists who aren't going to be doing a lot of wet into wet or color mixing or layering. So some card makers might like this palette, and many brush calligraphers might like the color range minus all those kind of samey reds. So if you're an artist who really wants a bright, bold punch of color, you're not going to be doing a lot of color mixing, you're not going to be doing a lot of color layering, these could be great watercolors for you. So what did you guys think of the Phoenix watercolors? They're bright, they're saturated, but it seems like they've got some optical brighteners, and when you mix two colors together, the color you get in return is not as saturated as it ought to be. I feel like this is one where only the field test is really going to allow us to call whether or not these watercolors are worth your money and where they line up in our student grade Showdown ranked tier list. So here are all 48 swatches in glorious full color. Here are our mixes, including our optical mixes, and you guys can see they're not as saturated as the full strength colors promised they could be. And then here is the wet into wet test that really told me what I needed to know, that there are optical brighteners afoot, and we should be kind of careful when it comes to the Phoenix watercolors. But even though I had high hopes for these watercolors and they didn't quite live up to what I was hoping for, there's still a chance of redemption with the field test, and I still had a lot of fun swatching these, and hopefully you guys had fun hanging out with me today. So hopefully this review is part of helping you guys to make art a habit by demystifying art supplies, hopefully answering some of your questions, and by demonstrating what we're looking for in quality art supplies so that you guys can buy art supplies that will make you happy and that will allow you to paint what you can imagine. That's a really big part of being satisfied with your art, is the ability to make your thoughts, your dreams come to life. So I hope you guys are safe and happy. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you guys again soon. Huge thanks to my amazing patrons. Their names are about to follow, for supporting my work and making reviews like this one possible. So have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.